Welcome to Executive Next Practice Institute, our Next Practice interview series. This morning, we're delighted to welcome Mark Boundy. I want to just give you a little bit of background here on what we've got going on. First of all, I'm your host this morning, Scott Hamilton, CEO of the Executive Next Practice Institute. We're based at the University of California, Irvine, and we're delighted to have you with us for this in our 390th of our series. This morning, again, we'll have this interview with Mark. During this session, as you look at the Zoom feature, you've got both a chat option as well as a Q&A function. Please feel free to use either one to communicate with us during the course of this session. Again, either Q&A or the chat feature will respond to all your questions during this very interactive session. For those of you just are new to the Executive Next Practice Institute, this is a long-running worldwide consortium of C-suite leaders, director level and above. As I mentioned, we're well north of 380 forums now, 60,000 plus attendees have been with us, both in our live sessions you see here on the right, as well as our VX sessions, the virtual sessions. Our whole purpose is to give relevant information and timely information to the C-suite so that you can look at investment opportunities, new strategies, and what we call next practices. We also have this first look content. So we're delighted to have Mark with us today because we're looking at a just published work and we're getting a first view at some of the ideas that he's putting forward in the marketplace with regards to competitive advantage in terms of business development and sales. Finally, you're joining a global audience this morning as I look across the participants. We've got people coming in from Europe, Mexico, Canada, as well as the States to look at this content. So in terms of getting involved with us, bookmark this series via the ENP Institute or just Google Executive Next Practice Institute. And you will see upcoming forums like the VX series next Thursday, this Thursday, in fact, on organizational agility with Dale Carnegie, terrific study on how you can remain nimble in today's times. And next week, going cloud first, the entire transition to digital, which is finally happening, unfortunately, by force, but it's got to happen across all industries. As you know, less than 12% of organizations have really fully utilized their digital capacity. So there's a long, long way to go. Also, two other things. On the 19th, back by popular demand, we're going to look at the path to the next normal, along with Liz Pellet from John Hopkins Fellow. Interesting study about how to look through market ambiguity. And also the following week, the science of executive decision making with Dr. Ken Brosseau and Armand Pajad of Texas A&M. Very interesting sessions coming up. Virtually every week, you'll see two sessions. Just look at our website. It's updated on a weekly basis. All right, where to find us? Here's the links for our events. We have a TV channel, YouTube channel. All of these events are recorded, so you'll be able to take a look at these later and share with your colleagues. And then finally, you join as an annual member. We have virtual memberships and in-person memberships, which we'll be getting back to. Join as an annual member now, and that takes you out through the end of September 2021. All right, with that, I want to welcome Mark Boundy. Mark has got quite a background here. He's grown businesses in a variety of industries over the past several years: sales, marketing, new product development, product management. He helps us find, win, and keep more business. He's led firms to be more value and price leaders in a wide variety of product and service industries, going back with W.L. Gore and Associates, Lucent, GE Capital. Mark's developed highly differentiated premium priced offerings in quite a few commodity businesses like electrical, cable, and money. He started Boundy Consulting to leverage his expertise to clients, and he's doing a fantastic job there. He does a lot of speaking on both the local, national, and international perspectives. And so, Mark, we are delighted to have you with us here this morning.
Scott, thanks for having me. I really appreciate your hospitality.
Yeah, well, let's drill right into this. I know we want to talk a little bit about the book, but and I certainly want to, this whole book on radical value, I want to get into that just a little bit, but let me just start with you. How have you been personally dealing with this COVID-19 dislocation?
Well, I consult with clients and I do a lot of work out of the home. So I have a really nice home office setup, and it actually right at the first of the lockdown, I had a training session with a client that was going to be 2/3 virtual and 1/3 in person. And it actually made it easier to do it all virtually. So I'm doing a lot of training, virtual training, but I'm also working with a lot of company and sales leaders, trying to help them figure out how their value has changed. Their product or their service may have not changed, but the perceived value, and we all know airlines and so forth, the perceived value is much lower, but the perceived value of Amazon and Grubhub and Netflix has gone up. So how has your value changed with your customers, and what can we do about it?
No, that's fantastic. As we know, this is a very difficult situation. I think, as I relayed to you before we got on the show here, that I was talking with the head of the Greater Irvine Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the most innovative chambers in the country, and they're dealing with this, getting hard hit as a chamber itself, with their hospitality membership and travel membership going by the wayside. So we're going to have this really very difficult phased in reentry economy. Some winners, some losers, some moving faster than others, very uneven as we get back into it, and still so many unknowns. One of the things you brought up about doing this book was the fact that you were not going to bring it out, you were not going to publish it unless it was content rich. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of business books out there that are 25 pages worth of content in a 250-page spine. And it makes those kind of books are really nice to scan on a flight, but I don't feel like I got my money's worth. And so I wanted to make something that was really content rich. And it started out just kind of as sales, but my point of view on sales is that it really is part of a holistic organizational effort. And so I wanted to come and synthesize psychology, anthropology, consumer behavior, consumer choice literature, some adult learning theory, and then of course my experience in sales and consulting with my clients, to kind of give a radically different view of what companies are, what they should be doing.
Yeah, and so let's just look at the core of this then, because I know you've got a lot to share here this morning, but let's just start at the core purpose of a business. What is the purpose of a business? Because we talk a lot about that in terms of setting purpose and vision, but what do you see as the real true purpose of a business?
Yeah, having had a P&L responsibility and leading businesses and marketing, my view, and of course now I have value goggles. I see the entire world through a value set of glasses. To me, the purpose of any business is to produce more value for your customers or clients than it costs you to produce. Everything you do, the whole reason for being is to produce customer value. So if that's your reason for being, why are your KPIs so disconnected to that core purpose?
Interesting. It's when you talk about that, because you brought up the customer here, and why is the customer perceived value so powerful? Why is it so important at this point?
Well,
customer perceived value.
And there's that customer perceived value. There's really an important reason for including every one of those words. Value only exists in the mind of the customer. So it has to be customer perceived. And if you offer value, but you didn't effectively communicate it to a customer, and that value didn't land between their ears, you don't have any value, because value only exists in the mind of your customer. And it's really interesting that sales and marketing is endoscopic surgery. You're trying to get something to happen inside somebody else's mind by remote control through a tiny little window, a tiny little view into their lives and their mind. And so that customer perceived value is hard to achieve, but once it's there, now your ability to price, your ability to grow, your ability to profit, all of those things are, you have the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's just take when we talk about customer perceived value in terms of what's going on right now. And by the way, again, to our viewers, feel free to chime in with your questions, Q&A, or your chat during this whole conversation, Q&A or chat. But Mark, when we look at the buying behaviors are disrupted now and being constantly disrupted. So going back into a rebound recovery, the perceived value is going to be much different. So how do we manage through that? How do we manage through changing expectations of the customer?
It's old-fashioned conversation. I have a real kind of a heartburn with the term messaging or pitching, because when the customer is changing so rapidly, if you're just lobbing a pitch at them or giving them a value message when their situation has changed so drastically, the probability that your pitch, your message is going to miss the mark goes up exponentially. And that's going to result in lost sales, lost growth, profit unrealized. And so we have to get down to getting our salespeople really good at understanding the customer, their mind, their situation, and then fitting what we offer into that customer situation.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's great advice, again, in terms of us going back to really keeping your ear to the ground right now, and finding more and more ways to connect with the customer virtually and other ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Customers right now, and I don't believe there's going to be a new normal. I think there's going to be a series of rolling normals. Yeah. And so rather than developing a strategy, you have to develop a strategy to adapt, to be adaptable, to be nimble. Customers don't buy our products and services. Customers buy their own outcomes that our products and services deliver for them. And what they will pay, the value of those outcomes, depends on the desirability of those outcomes. So I define value as the desirability of the outcomes that your customer derives from buying your product or service. You can think of it really loosely as what a customer will pay, is willing to pay. But if you think of it a little bit more granularly, a little more specifically as the value or the desirability of the outcomes, now everybody understands the thought process that has to go into increasing what they're willing to pay. Willing to pay is a nice goal line, but it doesn't tell you how to get there. Yeah. Desirability of the outcomes helps you understand, hey, I've got to really navigate a customer's buying process.
Yeah, with that, in that regard, you talk a lot about buying off ramps, and I think you've got some slides you want to show.
Yeah,
you have some great things in the book. I thought our viewers would want to see. I know you just got a few slides, but I think those really illuminate what you're talking about.
Yeah. So this comes from a lot of consumer behavior, buying psychology. And so that the top line is kind of the broad how value builds in the customer's mind. It starts with being able to differentiate, and then having your customer connect what you do different to their own outcome. Then make sure that they believe that they are going to achieve that outcome, and then understand how desirable that outcome is. And then we start expanding and developing that. So now I want to take that value development box and kind of expand it. Because once you've gotten to that box, a lot of sellers will stop selling and buyers will stop buying as soon as you get to that outcome being established and connected and desirable. And if you do it there, they will buy, but you're kind of vulnerable to the competition. Your goal is to get a buyer through to a very clear and specific idea Not only from, I want that outcome, to let me visualize myself getting to that outcome. Let me see if that outcome derives any second or third order outcomes. And now let me imagine those outcomes in such detail that I can apply a monetary value to them. As soon as your customer has told themselves that very detailed story and applied a monetary value to that value, now that same value is much more concrete, is much more clear, and they're much more willing to buy at a premium price or at a value-based price. And customers will quit this process as soon as they say, well, I'm just going to buy. And sellers, as soon as they hear that, are prone to saying, all right, I'll let you buy. And we'll talk here in a series, this isn't selling past a green light, but the further you can get your customer down this path of really a crystal clear idea of value, the more value is actually there, and the more pricing power you have, and the more differentiation you have. Even if you don't offer a premium price, you're more discount resistant, and the customer realizes what a bargain they're getting, and your probability of winning sales goes up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Take us through this just a bit more, and I'll hang back here as you kind of walk us through some of this.
Well, so that's it at a high level. And so what some people, especially sales professionals, will say is, I don't want to sell past the expression is sell past the green light. As soon as the customer says yes, stop talking. But here's the reality in a complex B2B world. Here's another slide here, is that so this is a graph that shows time from left to right and no units, but it's low and high on the vertical axis. And so as the customer starts with some trigger event saying, hey, status quo is no longer acceptable, I've got to figure out what to do differently, right? That's very early in their buying process, to all the way around at the end where the customer buys. Their frequency of actually asking for discounts or to even talk about price takes a hockey stick towards the very end. Our ability to build value using these buying off ramps all happens oftentimes before a client typically even engages with a salesperson. And so that's the reason we want salespeople to be business consultants, valued advisors, so they are in. But you want to build value while the entire buying team is going through a process. And so going back to this slide, you can have an individual going well and clearly through and developing clear and specific value before the rest of the buying team has completed their buying process. So you're not selling past the green light, you are building even further and further momentum. What also happens as you're going from the left in this vague value to clear specific value is that any individual person is increasingly willing to advocate for your solution within their buying team versus sitting back and letting the decision take its own path. As soon as they find a clear, specific, differentiated value to what you offer, that makes people courageous enough to engage with their team and not sit back in the conference room and let the conversation happen around them, but to be part and to guide that conversation and to advocate for something. In a group situation, that's risky. And right now, it's even riskier than ever. Anybody in the sales profession in B2B sales understands that any major change, a dislocation, a recession, a corporate restructuring, layoffs, causes workers and workers who are involved in these buying decisions to get very risk averse. And so you want to be able to be the person that shows what high, clear, specific value. So this helps them build a great internal business case. It gives them the courage to come out of the foxhole and advocate for doing something versus status quo. And so that left-hand off-ramp is an off-ramp that often suffers against status quo or even price competitive, price competition with your competitors, or even worse, like I say, status quo. So you want to move the people involved in a complex buying decision, a multi-person buying decision. You want to be able to get those people as far to the right into this very clear specific value while the group is still there, because this is where your ability to build value actually happens. If you try to build the same value towards where these two lines cross roughly is about where an RFP or something goes to bid. So that's when they really start hammering you for price. But if you start showing your value at that point, then it's seen as a very transparent attempt to defend price. And they've already defined their solution. They've already defined their outcomes, and your ability to build that value has pretty much passed you by. So you need to, I call this graph for the finance professionals out there, it's the time value of selling value. You have to sell it early, or you're going to be subject to discounts or losing the deal if you wait and don't do it at all, or if you try to do it late.
Well, let's just another question here, Mark. In terms of looking at profitability, how does the value directly impact profits? Period. How does this value equation directly impact profitability?
Well, the way that anybody looks at price is in comparison to your value. So the more value you've established and built in a customer's mind, the more price the higher the price premium you're able to command for that. Able to command, you may elect not to command, but you've got pricing power that you can elect to use to increase your profitability by a higher price, or to make more sales with a super high competitor resistant price at something lower, or any combination of those two. You get to draw the balance. But if you haven't built that value, you don't have that choice of drawing any balance. You have to listen to what your salespeople think the value should be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's take this up just a notch to the leadership level. Based on your experience, extensive experience in marketing, sales, general management, consulting, what does the executive suite need to know about sales right now?
Sales it's kind of crazy, I'm afraid. Sales people, let me.
You may have something on that too. I want to.
Yeah, I think I do. Let me check my screen. No, this is, so sales organizations are often sales organizations are very siloed today. And that's part of why I wrote the book. They are focused on selling, and about 3/4 of them, this is about 4 or 5-year-old data. CSO Insights stopped measuring it when they were acquired by somebody else. But I talked to the founder of CSO Insights, and they found that 3/4 of sales forces had no component of the comp plan tied to profitability. Think about that. We pay our salespeople to not care about profits. So you think, hey, maybe that's not me. Our salespeople are well-trained. Let me ask you this as a CEO, do you think your salespeople discount too much? Is there any suspicion? Now, what do you do about that suspicion? Have you looked at your discount spend over the course of the year? I've worked with a lot of companies that don't even understand the idea of discount spend. And let me explain that. Every dollar you get in different, either up or down in price at the last minute for an opportunity that you've won, your costs for execution and for fulfillment don't change. So that dollar in different revenue has nothing to do with your cost. So that dollar in revenue drops to or drops from the profit line. So, and a 1% change in price, some of the big consulting firms, I think McKinsey and Company did a study of the Fortune 500 and found that a 1% change in price would translate to an 11% change in profitability because of the leverage. And that just means that the Fortune 500 has an average pre-tax profit of 9%, for those of you who don't understand that. So every dollar that your salespeople discount, and typically what will happen is salespeople have discretion to discount a certain number of percent, and then a higher percentage with the sales manager's approval onto some escalation that gets all of the executive involved. And every dollar in that entire chain is a dollar of profit that you gave to your customer. And there can be good reasons to give your customers your profit dollars, but not as many as most salespeople do. Salespeople are human. And if you have not paid them and incentivized them to go after profit, and you don't even track how much profit they're giving away to your customers, what do you think they're likely to do? They're not lazy people. They're going to behave the way you measure and you measure them. And so they're going to sell short. They're not going to develop the value all the way with customers, because customers seem to buy often enough at that left-hand side of the buying off ramp that they make their commission check. So buyers are happy saying, I'm done processing all this, I'm ready to buy, and I don't have to go through that monetization process. So buyers are perfectly happy just buying, and then get their purchasing folks involved in grinding you on price. So it's one of those human situations where a couple fellows at UT Austin said it best: human beings choose very efficient ways to get on with it. And so if you've got the customer to a point where they say, I'll buy, even if it's at a lower price, and if you're not paid to care about what price they pay, you're fine, you're done, and the customer's done. So we have set up some real traps for sales forces, and executives need to understand what's going on there. There's another bad thing that's happening, and that is that when I started too many decades ago for me to admit on a webinar, there was 1 or 2 roles in sales and 3, maybe 4 who touched a customer with some frequency. And we told those non-sales customer facing roles, just stay in your lane, do your job, do your installation, do your project management, do your tech support. Don't understand the customer's situation. Don't do anything that looks like sales. Sales will do that. Now I've got a situation. Let me share this screen. I gave myself 10 minutes to list the roles that touch a customer and at some of my clients. And I came up in 10 minutes, I came up with 26 roles. And the yellow highlighted ones are sales. And if you can count through this list, you'll easily find 10 that you have. I have lots of clients that have 15. And we still tell all of them, stay in your lane. Don't act like a salesperson. Don't have a value conversation. Don't bother to understand how our products or solution affect our customers and their business and their lives. Leave that to sales. And think about some of these roles. They have a higher trust relationship with their counterpart than our salespeople. They have relationships and they talk to people that our sales can't hope to get an appointment with. And so 20 years ago, what was a good idea, telling these non-sales roles to just stay in your lanes, we've kind of had that frog boiling sort of a situation where it was fine 20 years ago when we kept the same treatment. We kept the frog in the water, and now it's boiling. We have 15 roles that have a great insight into our customer, and we're telling them, don't bother, don't do anything, stay in your lane. And that's a problem. That's a problem an executive needs to think about, not just a sales leader.
Oh, interesting. So this idea right now, this roll sheet is incredibly important. By the way, for those are viewing today, this session is being recorded, and we will have this posted a couple of days after today, and also we'll give you Mark's direct contact. Now, Mark, let's shift gears for just a minute because I want to get through a couple of these other important points here. One is you talk about value networks. Creating value networks. And again, talk to us about that in times of COVID-19. How does that enrich sales, creating these value networks?
Yeah, these value networks, this is a tool that I use with most of my clients, and it ends up being a tool that quickly evolves and has impacts outside of sales. And I'm going to give you an example of a value network. And this is for a product that everybody can understand pretty easily, commercial carpet. And so the feature, which is in the rectangle, is that this carpet wears longer, and we can prove it. Customers, in their shorthand, they know to buy what's in that yellow oval, dollars per year. And salespeople, because it's easy for the customer to understand, sell that. And here's the bad part. Competitors, because they know that, they are going to discount it. So imagine you wear 20% longer, and your customer knows it and buys into that fact. And so if you price your carpet 19% higher than the competition, the customer should choose you. But then the competitor comes back and discounts by 2%. And I mean, you can do the same thing if 15% price premium. But that is like fist fighting in a phone booth. That is the obvious, easy thing that customers understand intuitively, that salespeople sell intuitively, that competitors are well practiced in responding to. But being a longer wearing carpet also has a bunch of other business benefits. And one of them is fewer replacement cycles. So imagine the business disruption if that carpet is sitting under your 24/7 customer service department. Now it's a 2-day process to remove the furniture, strip the floors, clean the floors, replace the carpet, and put the furniture back if you're really moving. And what are you going to do for 2 days of business disruption if that is underneath your customer service? Now, if that same carpet is underneath the conference room, you just replace it over the weekend. So every one of these is a value hypothesis. And you have to understand the customer and their situation to understand which of these apply and when. But if that's under the customer service department, that cost of business disruption is many times higher than the price of the carpet. So suddenly the value, and it's easy for the customer to understand it, but it's not something a customer will calculate on their own unguided. So it's the salesperson's responsibility to understand all of the different nuances of the value they could offer and what they offer now. So here's another one. Here's another slide. And before I go to the other slide, you can see these bullet points underneath that. There's a different department that cares about each one of these balloons. So you don't talk to every department about every one of these. You can actually be strategic and have some very focused value conversations. So here's one that I worked on, and this has to do with something that happened in COVID. So this is a value network for Made in the USA. And the red balloons around the right-hand column are what we've always heard, right? It's this patriotic principles, moral persuasion, some marketing angle, and there's a dotted line to long-term financial performance because that works but only on a very limited basis. The yellow balloons are something that works on a case-by-case basis, right? If we innovate with a supplier, we need a semi-custom product and some joint design type solutions, then we're more responsive and you retain some joint intellectual property. But look at all these green balloons that have popped up. They were always true for Made in the USA. These were always there, but they were never something that gravitated or that impacted a customer, or that customers would usually say, yeah, but that's never going to really happen, right? So all of this having your supply chain disrupted, which actually can shut your whole business down, which means laying off your people and hoping you can get them back. And all of those awful outcomes, your operational disruption, business disruption, being less valuable to your clients, all of those things were always true, but suddenly the value of all those green bubbles went up. And it's time for anybody who makes something in the USA to start having conversations around all these things. Did you experience this? How much did it cost you this time? And if you think in every year there's a 2% chance that you're going to get hit by this again, maybe let's take all these costs times 2%. And that's what you should kind of be willing to invest in keeping a US supplier. That's what our price premium should be worth to you.
Yeah, Mark, this is a really interesting chart because again, when you look at, you could say that the green bubbles here you have on this chart, this is an unusual situation that in most cases you may have one or two. Say if it's a financial catastrophe or a terrorist event or something like that. Here we have a global impact. So that you've got all these coming together. I think this is extremely useful in terms of looking at all the implications, pricing those out, and then also looking at them from a customer perspective.
Absolutely. And it's all of these, until you've had a discussion with a particular customer, all of these are a hypothesis. All of these are food for a really great sales conversation, but that's all they are until a customer says, yeah, I just got bit by that and it cost me $500,000.
Yeah, you bring up a great question because you started this whole conversation with having the conversation with your customer, with your markets. These are the kind of questions you'd want to be asking. These are first and foremost in front of them. And too often we see salespeople talking about our product first, or trying to pitch your benefits, features and benefits, right? As opposed to going into a customer, either a new market or existing market, and saying, how are you being impacted in these categories? This is a high-level discussion and will lead you a lot of nuggets of information. So I got to applaud you for mapping it out like this.
Thank you. And so this is a really useful tool, not only to have as a guide for sales conversations, but now as sales starts to find out which of these bubbles really start gravitating consistently with customers, now marketing is able to start producing some content around that outcome so that customers are more likely to call you in and have this conversation. As some of these things start getting value and start winning business, now your product development people can say, we have to do more like this. Here's the customer situation. Here's how we innovate. We can use this as a roadmap for innovation. Salespeople, when a salesperson finds a brand new bubble that I didn't put in this network, yeah, we put that bubble in the network and we train salespeople, we train marketing, and we get that discovery by a really great salesperson socialized throughout the entire team in a graphic way that's easy for them to replicate. So you're replicating best practices across the sales force, mapping them back into our marketing strategies and content, mapping them all the way back into our innovation and manufacturing. Some of these things are, if you have one of your components is sourced in China, I'm made in the United States, but I have one key component made in China, this whole thing falls apart. So now your sourcing organization suddenly realizes how important it is for them to find all the components locally or to get a stable supply. And so suddenly your entire business is reacting to customer perceived value.
Yeah. No, this is so powerful right here. I know we talk a lot, Mark, in this series about tapping the collective intelligence of your organization. Salespeople are key stakeholders in your organization, and this is a great way to engage them in a framework so that they can, to your point, they could start to look at these other potential bubbles that we have out there that could impact us financially, logistically, market-wise. So I think it's a great perspective to go forward with.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happens if my client success or my project managers or the installers of my equipment are taught how to I had a client who installed big equipment on a factory floor, and we're working with their installers to once a day while they're installing, stand up, stretch their back out, and look across the aisle and ask a customer, that over there, that looks like a problem. What happens when that breaks? How much does that cost you a year? If that installer who has that trusting relationship in the moment can gather that little bit of insight and then carry it back to the hive is stronger. And then suddenly you're building a new bubble in your value network, and your innovation and your marketing people suddenly find an angle that they didn't know about because we always told the installers to stay in their lane. That gets really powerful in a hurry.
Oh, that's fantastic. We've got a couple of questions. A question came in from one of our international viewers, and he talks about the fact that Clayton Christensen did some great research about disruptive innovation, of course. We lost Clayton last year, but we had his associate Rita McGrath on this series 2 weeks ago. But at any rate, Clayton talked about disruptive innovation, and he said if you focus very much on a certain client segment, you can be disrupted. In other words, if your whole focus is on one particular segment, it's easier for you to be disruptive. How does that increase in this times of COVID-19?
Boy, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And I'm a huge disciple of Clayton Christensen. I started writing a book where Clayton Christensen talked about why big companies have a hard time innovating because of some of the strategic considerations. I wrote the bookend to that is that there's internal cultural things that make big companies bad at innovating just because of the processes and the culture they set up. So I'm a huge Clay Christensen fan, and I mourned his loss. You're absolutely right. But if you understand your full value network and how that might affect one certain client segment, you know what some of your other value is, and this guides you to looking at other client segments. A lot of my clients, I actually have a client who is a US manufacturer, and so he started looking for new client segments based on some of the bubbles in here. He started selling to new clients because this gives you visibility of understanding why you're choosing the client segments you are and what other client segments you might effectively be choosing because of the value you offer.
Yeah. Again, this is it's an interesting analysis and one that requires you to kind of pull back and relook at everything. I'm looking at our participants today, and we've got quite a few middle market companies that are participating in this viewing today. And I see a couple of them who have salespeople they've never met. Their company has been virtual sales forever. But in cases like that where they've already been virtual for a decade or more, what do you prescribe for resetting right now in times of COVID-19? Certainly this chart is a great start. Are there other things you can prescribe in terms of re-engaging the sales force, even if they've been virtual for years?
Yeah. Virtual is being able to have an operational management cadence to be able to do that successfully virtually is a huge advantage. Here's what is going to change is that customers are going to be more fearful, more risk averse. I always say they duck into a foxhole for about 6 months is my rule of thumb with my clients. And the first seller who gets somebody out of a foxhole is the seller who goes in and helps communicate to that customer, I understand your business. And here's the outcomes that you can achieve if you will only peek your head over the foxhole. You want to get that fearful customer comfortable with the outcomes. And so I'm a huge proponent of business acumen. And so I actually have a business profiling formula, which is kind of the internal and external forces you see in the left 2 columns here. I want to understand this customer. This is kind of if you're in the startup world and you see the business model canvas, or you see Porter's 5 forces, you'll see footprints of both of those in this thing, plus 1 or 2 additional devices. But if you can understand these 12 aspects of a customer, you can start looking and helping them understand a wide variety of new new outcomes that they didn't understand or predict for themselves. And so that's on the right-hand side, and that takes business acumen. In COVID-19 days, a virtual team with a virtual practice has an advantage, but you still need to do something. And this is what elite sellers have always done naturally. Have business acumens, understand the customer's business, being able to describe customer outcomes. Microsoft buys their enterprise software salespeople an MBA so that they can do exactly this. And you don't have to buy your salespeople an MBA, but you do have to get them up to speed and being able to understand the customer and talk about the customers from their standpoint. Remember, when you're celebrating a closed deal as a salesperson, that is the first day your customer is accountable. I heard a jet fighter pilot use the word VURP, V-U-R-P. That's a burp that tastes like vomit. You're so scared when you've signed that deal, and to think of those 2 Zoom windows where the sales team is up and down celebrating and ringing a bell, and the client is experiencing heart-melting dread because they just committed to something. Mm-hmm. And now that dread got even worse because it's COVID-19 days and everything's at risk. Every decision you make is under a higher power microscope. Why are we calling it closing a deal now?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting comment because you're right. It's this post-sale nurturing empathy for the customer, staying in touch, making adjustments as you go along, and it's absolutely becoming so critical. I know a lot of our companies are reaching out to their clients now about deals that were in progress or had just been quote unquote closed, and making sure that their customers are still comfortable. And in fact, some were saying, look, you signed this deal in March, things have changed. Are you still comfortable with this deal? And they're gaining a lot more trust, respect, and long-term customers by doing that.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic.
Absolutely. In kind of the sales press and the sales, all the articles on LinkedIn, the first 2 or 3 weeks of lockdown, they were saying, don't sell right now, just connect, show that you care, and ask what's changed and what you can do. And that was a good idea for the first couple of weeks, but you can't do that perpetually.
Right.
You have to go through a process where you're gathering this information, these 12 items on the left 2 columns, with your client saying, I want to really understand what's going on in your business, really understand what's changed, really understand how your value has changed with your customer, how my value has changed with you, so that we can make the best decisions together. And then once you start thinking creatively outside the box at all the different kinds of outcomes that you could deliver to a customer that they didn't anticipate, suddenly you're selling outcomes that your competitors aren't.
Yeah, it's so true. One of the comments from one of our viewers right now was that these potential outcomes, you've got to be considering every single one of them. Again, in previous times of disruption, maybe you asked several of the questions, but never have we had a case where you want to be asking and getting to know all these potential outcomes for every customer.
Boy, you're right.
Amazing.
Yeah. In 2012, 2013, McKinsey & Company surveyed a bunch of boards of directors. And I think they stopped doing this survey on an annual basis because the information looked too embarrassing to directors. What they found out was 22 point something percent, and then the next year, 23 or 24% of directors even understood and could articulate the value that their company provided to its customers. I have been a sales consultant for a better part of a decade with Miller Hyman, like the oldest, largest, biggest B2B sales training company. So I rubbed shoulders with 100 different sales consultants. And since then, that 100 has included people of the major competitors in sales training. And to a person, they all said what salespeople do worst is understand customer business outcomes. So think about that. What customers value is based on outcomes. It is the most important thing for a customer, and it's what salespeople do worst. So this business acumen and understanding your customer situation has always been a differentiator for the elite sellers in the world. But now I honestly think it's going to be a matter of survival, because you aren't going to get a client out of the foxhole if you can't do this like the elite people always have done before.
Yeah, that's so true. There's never been a better time. And now, did you have one other slide to show? And I'm going to kind of.
No, I don't. I think I'm done.
Okay. Well, what I was going to do, let's do this as kind of a wrap up, Mark. Again, thank you for spending time today. For those of you that are viewers, I strongly recommend you get this book. We've just barely touched the surface on it. Going back to why Mark wrote the book and why I was compelled to have him on as an interviewee today is the fact that he did take a step back. It is a content-rich book. It is what I call a 100% book. There's a lot of nuggets in there. It goes from strategic to tactical to technical. So those of you in sales or executives leading sales, you definitely need to read this book at this point. Mark, I think also the points we touched on, particularly the value networks, this outcome-based approach is so critical. I want to have you back in the next 30, 60 days as we look across industry sector by sector and what they're doing in terms of, and what they're uncovering. Because I can see your matrix where you did the bubbles, the value bubbles.
Yeah.
I can see that, of course, looking somewhat different for virtually any sector.
Yeah, it actually starts with, we can do that for an individual client, because in the carpet case, that carpet wears longer than the competitor. So that's a differentiated feature. And let's find out all of the customer outcomes that are the children of that differentiated feature of the seller. So if you do this one thing best, here's all the customer outcomes that you can deliver the best.
Right.
And so that's kind of the beauty of that. And I'd be very happy to work with any of your clients. We could dive into and have a really great value networks conversation.
Yeah, and what we'll do again, thank you for joining us today. Those dear viewers on the line, again, this session was recorded. It'll be posted. We'll also be sending you an email with Mark's contact information and how you can get the book. And we look forward to seeing all of you this Thursday, May 7th, for our Organizational Agility Seminar. That's also at 11 o'clock Pacific time, 2 p.m. East Coast time. Mark, thanks again. Great seeing you all. Look forward to seeing you in person in Scottsdale sooner than later.
Yeah, I sure hope so. Scott, this was a really great conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with your members.
Thanks again, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks.
All right,
you too.
enjoy.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Again, thanks all for joining us. Look forward to seeing you on May 7th. Talk to you soon. Editors, this is where you make your mark for the end of the video. Thank you.